The 3 pillars of Stoicism that will solve your problems. Introduction. There is a philosophy that was born in the noise and chaos of ancient Athens, refined in the blood and politics of Rome, practiced by slaves and emperors alike, and somehow, across more than 2,000 years of human history, has arrived at this exact moment in your life with something urgent and precise to say to you. That philosophy is Stoicism, and before you dismiss it as the cold, emotionless doctrine that popular culture has mistakenly made it out to be, consider this: the people who built it were not running from life. They were running toward it with open eyes, steady hands, and a refusal to be destroyed by the parts of it they could not control. Stoicism was not invented for monks in monasteries or scholars in libraries. It was forged in the real world, in the experience of Epictetus, who was born a slave and had no control over his body, his freedom, or his fate, yet cultivated an inner life so sovereign and unassailable that his teachings have outlasted empires. It was lived by Marcus Aurelius, who ruled the known world and yet wrote, in his private journal, about the daily struggle to remain humble, patient, and honest in the face of power that could have corrupted anyone. It was practiced by Seneca, who moved between poverty and enormous wealth and discovered that neither condition was the source of the peace he sought. These were not perfect men. They did not claim to be what they claimed, and what they demonstrated through the texture of their actual lives was that human beings possess, regardless of their circumstances, the capacity to respond to reality with wisdom rather than panic, with clarity rather than confusion, with purpose rather than drift. And that this capacity, when deliberately cultivated, changes everything. This video is about the 3 pillars that hold the entire Stoic structure together. Not every Stoic concept, not an academic survey. 3 pillars, the 3 that, if you understand them deeply enough and apply them honestly enough, have the power to fundamentally alter your relationship with every significant problem in your life. By the end, you will not have a list of tips. You will have something more valuable, a framework, a way of seeing, a set of tools that do not expire. The world that made Stoicism necessary. Before we enter the pillars themselves, it is worth pausing to understand the world that made Stoicism necessary. Because Stoicism did not emerge from comfort. It emerged from the same condition that you are living through right now, a world that is unpredictable, often unfair, frequently painful, and entirely indifferent to your personal preferences about how things should go. The ancient world was, in many respects, more brutally honest about this than ours. People died young and without warning. Empires rose and collapsed. Fortunes were made and destroyed in a season. Plagues arrived without explanation and left without apology. Political power was capricious and dangerous. The Stoics lived inside this reality without the cushioning that modern people have constructed. The insurance policies, the medical advances, the psychological frameworks for processing difficulty. They had to face the raw fact of human vulnerability directly, and they had to find a way to live well inside it. What they discovered, what Zeno of Citium first articulated when he began teaching in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch that gave the philosophy its name, was that the source of human suffering was not primarily external. It was internal. It was not what happened to you that determined the quality of your life. It was what you made of what happened to you. It was the stories you told, the judgments you formed, the responses you chose. And if the source of suffering was internal, then the remedy was internal too. This was the revolutionary insight at the heart of Stoicism, and it is no less revolutionary today than it was 2,000 years ago. This insight gave birth to 3 foundational pillars. Each one addresses a different dimension of the human experience. Together, they form a complete and practical philosophy for living, not in a perfect world, but in this one. Pillar 1. The dichotomy of control. Know what is yours. The first pillar is the one that Epictetus placed at the very beginning of his handbook, the Enchiridion, because he understood that without it, nothing else the Stoics taught could take root. It is called the dichotomy of control, and it is both the simplest and the most demanding idea in all of Stoic philosophy. Simple, because its logic is immediately clear. Demanding, because actually living by it requires a daily, moment-by-moment discipline that most people never fully achieve, but that even partial practice transforms. The idea is this: everything in life falls into one of two categories. There are things within your control, and there are things outside your control. The things within your control are, in Epictetus's precise formulation, your judgments, your impulses, your desires, and your aversions, in other words, the movements of your own mind. The things outside your control are everything else: your body, your reputation, your wealth, other people's opinions and actions, the outcomes of your efforts. The weather, the economy, the behavior of governments and institutions, the arc of history, the timing of death. This distinction sounds straightforward, but the implications of taking it seriously are staggering. Because most human suffering, not all, but most, is generated by the attempt to control things that are not, in fact, controllable. We suffer because we believe that our happiness depends on outcomes we cannot guarantee. We suffer because we have built our sense of security on foundations, health, money, other people's love and approval, that are genuinely outside our ultimate control and therefore genuinely unstable. We suffer because we spend enormous amounts of mental and emotional energy trying to manage, manipulate, and arrange the external world into a configuration that feels safe, and the external world keeps refusing to cooperate. The Stoic prescription is not to stop caring about outcomes. It is to relocate the center of your concern. Instead of asking, will this work out the way I want it to? The Stoic asks, am I bringing to this situation everything within my power? Am I thinking clearly? Am I acting with integrity? Am I responding rather than reacting? These are questions about what is genuinely yours, your effort, your attention, your character, and they are questions you can always answer with agency. The outcome is not yours. The response is Pillar 1 continued, where real power lies. This is not passivity. This is one of the most persistent and damaging misunderstandings of Stoic philosophy, the idea that accepting what you cannot control means accepting defeat, going limp, surrendering your ambitions. It means nothing of the kind. Marcus Aurelius led armies, reformed laws, and governed an empire, none of which suggests a man who had given up on influencing the world. Epictetus taught, wrote, and shaped the thinking of generations, none of which suggests a man who had decided that his actions were meaningless. What they had done was something far more sophisticated than giving up. They had learned to act with full commitment while remaining genuinely unattached to results they could not guarantee. The practical difference this makes is enormous. Consider two people preparing for the same difficult conversation, a confrontation with a colleague, a difficult truth to tell a loved one, a case to make to someone in power. The first person prepares with their attention split between what they need to say and how the other person will react. They rehearse not just their own words but the other person's responses. They try to manage, in advance, something they cannot manage, another person's feelings and choices. They arrive at the conversation already exhausted, already defensive, already subtly manipulative in their approach because they are trying to produce a specific outcome in a person who is not under their control. The second person, the one practicing the first Stoic pillar, prepares differently. They think carefully about what they need to say and how to say it with clarity and honesty. They decide on the values they want to bring to the conversation: patience, directness, compassion. They commit to showing up fully and speaking truthfully. And then they let go of what will happen next. Not with indifference, with genuine acceptance that another person's response is not theirs to determine. They arrive at the conversation lighter, clearer, more present. And paradoxically, because they are not trying to control what cannot be controlled, they are often more genuinely persuasive, because they are actually listening rather than managing. This is where the first pillar lives in practice. Not in dramatic moments of philosophical surrender, but in the ordinary moments of daily life, in the choice to put your full energy into what is genuinely yours, and to release, with real willingness, what is not. Pillar 1 continued. The freedom hidden in limitation. There is something else the first pillar offers that is easy to miss in the initial encounter with it, something that only becomes visible when you sit with the idea long enough to feel its full weight. It is this: the dichotomy of control is not just a strategy for reducing suffering. It is a map to genuine freedom. And it locates that freedom in the last place most people would think to look, in limitation. Here is what that means. Most people experience freedom as the expansion of options. The more you can control, the more you can have, the more you can arrange the world to your liking, the freer you are. This is the dominant modern conception of freedom, and it drives enormous amounts of human striving. But it has a fatal flaw, which is that the world will always be larger and less controllable than your capacity to manage it. So the person pursuing freedom through control is pursuing something they can never fully achieve, and the gap between what they can control and what they wish they could control becomes, itself, a source of chronic anxiety and frustration. The Stoic inversion is this: real freedom is not the expansion of control. It is the contraction of need. The person who genuinely needs nothing from the external world, not approval, not specific outcomes, not the behavior of other people, is free in a way that no amount of power or wealth can replicate. Epictetus, the slave, was in this sense freer than many of his masters. He had nothing they could take that he had not already relinquished at a deeper level. His freedom was not granted by circumstance. It was cultivated by philosophy. And that kind of freedom, unlike every other kind, cannot be taken away. Pillar 2. Virtue is the highest good, the only thing worth building. The second pillar is the one that gives Stoicism its moral backbone, the claim that virtue is not merely one good among many, not merely a useful trait that helps you achieve other things, but the highest good, the only thing that is genuinely and unconditionally worth pursuing. This is a bold claim. It was bold when the Stoics made it, and it remains bold today, because we live in a world that has largely decided that virtue is instrumental at best and naive at worst. We tend to think of virtue as something that's nice to have if it doesn't cost too much, something we perform for the benefit of our social reputation, something children are taught before they grow old enough to understand how the world really works. The Stoics had a different understanding, one grounded not in sentiment but in logic. They argued that all the things human beings typically pursue in the belief that they will bring happiness, wealth, health, fame, pleasure, power, comfort, or what the Stoics called preferred indifference. They are preferable to their opposites, yes. It is better to be healthy than sick, better to have money than to be destitute, better to be respected than despised. The Stoics were not ascetics who pretended these things didn't matter. But, and this is the crucial point, none of these things are genuinely good in themselves. All of them can be used well or badly. Money can be used to build hospitals or to bribe judges. Health can be used to serve others or to dominate them. Fame can be used to inspire or to corrupt. The thing that determines whether any external good becomes truly good is the character of the person wielding it, and character is virtue. Pillar 2 continued. The 4 virtues and what they actually mean. The Stoics identified 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, and they understood these not as abstract ideals but as practical capacities that could be developed through deliberate practice. It is worth dwelling on each one, because in the popular understanding they have been flattened into something far less interesting than what the Stoics actually meant. Wisdom, for the Stoics, was not the accumulation of knowledge or the performance of intelligence. It was the ability to see things as they actually are, to cut through the distortions of desire, fear, pride, and habit, and perceive reality with something approaching clarity. It was the capacity to understand what a situation actually requires and to respond to it well. This is harder than it sounds. Most of what passes for thinking is rationalization, the mind working backward from what we already want to believe, constructing arguments that support our existing preferences. Wisdom, in the Stoic sense, requires the willingness to be wrong, to revise, to see what is inconvenient as readily as what is flattering. This is rare. It is also the foundation of everything else. Justice, for the Stoics, was not primarily a legal concept. It was the recognition that we are all part of a larger human community, what Marcus Aurelius called the city of the world, and that our actions exist within a web of relationships and obligations that we did not choose but are bound by nonetheless. Justice was the virtue of showing up rightly in relation to others, with honesty, with fairness, with genuine concern for their well-being rather than mere performance of concern. It was the antidote to the narcissism of treating every situation as primarily a story about you. Courage, in the Stoic understanding, was not the absence of fear. It was the refusal to be governed by it. Epictetus did not pretend that the slave who refuses to betray his dignity does not feel fear. He feels it acutely. But the fear does not reach the place where his decisions are made. This is a crucial distinction between feeling an emotion and being controlled by it that runs through all of Stoic thinking about virtue. Courage is not bravado. It is the capacity to do what wisdom and justice require even when fear is present and loud. Temperance, perhaps the most misunderstood of the 4, was not puritanical self-denial. It was proportion. It was the ability to engage with pleasure, success, comfort, and abundance without being captured by them, to enjoy good things without becoming dependent on them, to know the difference between what you want and what you need, to keep the appetites in their proper place rather than allowing them to become the organizing principle of a life. Pillar 2 continued. Why virtue solves what nothing else can. Here is why this matters in practical terms. Why the Stoic insistence on virtue as the highest good is not idealism but pragmatism of the deepest kind. Every other strategy for solving life's problems is contingent. More money solves your financial problems until it creates new ones. Anxiety about losing it, corruption by having it, the discovery that it did not bring the peace you expected. Better health solves your physical problems until illness returns, as it always does, or until the fear of illness consumes as much energy as illness itself. A better relationship solves your loneliness until the relationship changes, as all relationships do, or until you discover that the loneliness was always, in part, an inside job. None of these things are bad, they are genuinely preferable, and the Stoics said so, but they cannot serve as the foundation of a life because they are not reliable. They come and go, they are subject to forces beyond your control. If your well-being depends on them, your well-being will always be hostage to circumstances. Virtue is different. Virtue is the one good that cannot be taken from you by external events. Marcus Aurelius lost children. He had several who died young, as was common in the ancient world. He faced military threats, plagues, and political betrayals. He could not control any of it, but he could control, and did control, with extraordinary consistency, how he showed up in response. Whether he met difficulty with patience or spite, whether he exercised justice or abused his power, whether he remained honest or found convenient self-deceptions. This was his domain, and in that domain, he worked with everything he had. This is the promise of the second pillar, that regardless of what your life throws at you, there is always a dimension of it that belongs to you, always a question of character available to you, always the possibility of doing the next thing with wisdom, justice, courage, and proportion. And that if you make this your primary pursuit rather than the pursuit of outcomes you cannot guarantee, something fundamental shifts. You become, in the truest sense, harder to destroy. Pillar 2 continued. Virtue in the ordinary moments. There is a temptation, when discussing virtue in elevated terms, to imagine that it is primarily relevant to grand moments, the great test, the defining crisis, the heroic choice. The Stoics would have resisted this temptation firmly. They understood that character is not built in dramatic moments. It is built in the accumulation of small ones, in the choice to tell the small truth when the small lie would be easier, to be patient in the minor irritation as well as the major one, to be generous when no one is watching, to do careful work when careless work would pass unnoticed. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations not for publication, not for posterity, but as a private practice, a daily reckoning with himself, a rehearsal of the principles he was trying to live. He was not performing virtue. He was practicing it, in the way an athlete practices, knowing that the strength you build in training is the strength available to you in the moment that actually matters. The virtue you practice in small moments is the virtue you will have access to in the large ones. There is no other way to build it. This is what makes the second pillar not just a philosophical ideal but a daily practice, a practice that begins, as all genuine practices do, not with grand gestures but with the very next choice in front of you. Pillar 3. Memento mori in the present moment, living as if it matters. The third pillar is the one that most people encounter with resistance before they encounter it with gratitude. It is the Stoic practice of memento mori, the deliberate, daily contemplation of death. The phrase, in Latin, means simply, remember that you will die. And the Stoics believed that this remembering, not as a morbid obsession but as a clear-eyed acknowledgement, was one of the most powerful tools available to a human being for actually living well. This runs against almost every instinct of contemporary culture. We live in a world that has organized itself, to an extraordinary degree, around the avoidance of death, not just physical death, but its contemplation. We do not talk about it at dinner tables. We quarantine it in hospitals and nursing homes. We have outsourced it to professionals and surrounded it with so many euphemisms that many people arrive at middle age having barely confronted, in any serious way, the fact that they are going to die. And this avoidance, the Stoics would argue, is not protective. It is actively harmful. It is the thing that allows us to sleepwalk through our own lives, to defer the important conversations, to postpone the things that actually matter, to spend our days managing small anxieties while the large reality of our limited time goes deliberately unexamined. Seneca wrote with an urgency on this subject that still feels almost uncomfortably direct, the urgency of a man who had come close to death several times and had emerged from each encounter with a sharpened sense of what was actually being wasted in the hours given over to triviality, resentment, distraction, and procrastination. He was not morbid, he was awake, and he wanted, desperately, to transfer that wakefulness to his readers. Pillar 3 continued. What death teaches about time. The practical insight that memento mori generates is this: time is the only resource that is genuinely irreplaceable. Money lost can be recovered. Health lost can sometimes be restored. Relationships damaged can sometimes be repaired. But time spent is gone with an absoluteness that nothing else in human experience quite matches. Every hour you live is an hour you will not live again. Every day given over to resentment, to distraction, to the postponement of what genuinely matters, is a day that has been permanently removed from the finite total you have been given. Seneca put this with characteristic directness. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. The person who complains of insufficient time is usually not suffering from a shortage of years. They are suffering from a failure to inhabit the ones they have. They are living in the past, rehearsing old grievances, replaying old failures, carrying old wounds that no longer serve any purpose but habit. Or they are living in the future, anxious about outcomes that have not yet occurred, planning for contingencies that may never arrive, deferring the experience of actual living to some imagined later moment when circumstances will be more favorable. The present moment, the only moment in which living is actually possible, goes largely unlived. The Stoic practice of memento mori is designed to correct this. By bringing death into clear view, it restores the present to its proper significance. It makes the conversation you are having now matter. It makes the work in front of you now matter. It makes the person across the table from you now matter, because the Stoic who has genuinely internalized the reality of mortality knows, in a way that is more than intellectual, that this moment is not guaranteed to repeat. Pillar 3 continued. Negative visualization, the art of loving what you have. Closely related to memento mori is a practice the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils, or what modern practitioners sometimes call negative visualization. The practice involves deliberately imagining the loss of the things you value most, your health, your work, your home, the people you love, not in order to generate anxiety about losing them, but in order to generate genuine appreciation for the fact that you have not yet lost them. This is counterintuitive in a culture that tends to equate happiness with positive thinking, with the active cultivation of optimistic images and affirming thoughts. The Stoic approach goes in the opposite direction, and the results are, paradoxically, more reliably positive. The person who has genuinely imagined losing their health does not take their body for granted in the way that most healthy people do. The person who has genuinely contemplated the death of someone they love does not waste the time they have with that person on trivial resentments and petty conflicts in the way that most people do when the reality of loss has been carefully kept at arm's length. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly. He wrote, in the Meditations, about looking at his food and thinking of the dead animal, about looking at his wine and thinking of fermented grapes, about stripping away the narratives that made ordinary things seem glamorous or desirable and seeing them as what they actually were. This was not depression. It was a technique for defeating the hedonic adaptation that causes human beings to rapidly take their blessings for granted and return to a baseline of wanting more. By seeing clearly what things actually are, and by imagining their absence, he restored to them their actual value. The practice of negative visualization is, in the end, a practice of gratitude, but a form of gratitude that has been tested against reality rather than merely performed. Pillar 3 continued. The urgency that changes everything. There is a quality of attention that memento mori generates, when the practice is taken seriously rather than merely acknowledged intellectually, that is difficult to describe but immediately recognizable once experienced. It is a quality of urgency without panic, a sense that the present moment is genuinely, irreversibly significant, not because everything depends on it, but because it is real in a way that past and future never quite are, and because it will not come again. This urgency has a clarifying effect on priorities. When you genuinely hold in mind the fact of your mortality, not as an abstract philosophical position but as a lived reality that shapes your actual choices, certain things that seemed urgent reveal themselves as trivial, and certain things that you have been indefinitely postponing reveal themselves as matters of genuine importance. The argument with a family member that you have been nursing for years, how does it look in the light of your shared mortality? The creative work you have been deferring until you feel more ready, how does it look when you honestly acknowledge that readiness may never arrive in the form you have been waiting for? The conversation you have been avoiding because it would be difficult, how does it look when you consider that the person you need to have it with is, like you, running on borrowed time? These are not comfortable questions. They were not meant to be. The Stoics were not in the business of making people comfortable. They were in the business of making people live, really live, with awareness and intention and the full use of whatever time they had been given. Memento mori is the alarm clock of the soul. It wakes you up, and once you are awake, there is work to do where the three pillars meet. The three pillars of Stoicism are not independent of each other. They form a unified structure, each one reinforcing and requiring the others, each one incomplete without the rest. This integration is worth making explicit, because it is where the real power of the philosophy becomes visible. The first pillar, the dichotomy of control, tells you where to direct your energy. It frees you from the exhausting and ultimately futile attempt to manage what cannot be managed, and redirects your attention to the only domain where you have genuine agency, your own mind, your own character, your own response. But this redirection requires somewhere to go. It requires a positive answer to the question, if I am not pursuing outcomes, what am I pursuing? The second pillar provides that answer. You are pursuing virtue. You are building character. You are doing the work of becoming the kind of person who meets whatever comes, loss, success, conflict, beauty, death, with wisdom, justice, courage, and proportion. And the third pillar, memento mori, provides the urgency that makes the practice of the first two not merely intellectually appealing but emotionally compelling. It is easy to nod along to the dichotomy of control as an interesting philosophical idea and then spend the rest of the day reacting to your email. It is easy to admire the concept of virtue without actually doing the uncomfortable work of becoming more honest, more patient, more just in your ordinary interactions. Memento mori makes these things harder to defer. Because the clock is running. Because the time for becoming the person you want to be is not some indefinitely available future resource. It is now, and now, and now, each now unrepeatable, each one either used or wasted. Together, the three pillars create something that no single one of them can create alone. They create a life of genuine intentionality, a life in which you know what is yours to do, you know the standard you are trying to meet, and you know, with a clarity that keeps you honest, that the time to do it is not later. It is here, the problems these pillars actually solve. It is worth being concrete about what Stoic philosophy, built on these three pillars, can and cannot do. It cannot make life easy. It cannot remove suffering. It cannot protect you from loss or failure or the behavior of other people or the indifference of circumstance. The Stoics never claimed it could. They lived in a world of genuine hardship and they knew the limits of philosophy. What it can do is change your relationship to difficulty in a way that changes everything else. It can remove the additional suffering that comes from fighting what cannot be changed, the suffering of resentment, of obsessive rumination, of the endless mental rehearsal of grievances. It can provide a standard of character that gives you something stable to orient by when external circumstances become chaotic. It can restore, through the practice of memento mori, a sense of proportion and priority that chronic busyness and distraction steadily erode. The problems it solves are primarily the problems that we add to reality through our own minds, the problems of anxiety about what we cannot control, of aimlessness in the absence of a clear understanding of what we are actually for, of the chronic dissatisfaction that comes from taking our remaining time for granted. These are not small problems. In many lives, they are the central problems, the ones that, if resolved, would transform everything else. The practical application begins simply. Today, in your next difficult moment, ask, is this within my control or outside it? If outside it, can I release it? If within it, am I bringing my best to it? In your next interaction, ask, am I acting with virtue here, with honesty, with justice, with the kind of courage required to be genuinely present and genuine in what I say? And sometime today, not theoretically but actually, sit with the fact of your mortality. Not to frighten yourself, to wake yourself up to restore to the hours in front of you their actual, irreplaceable, never to be recovered weight. Living the philosophy, a final reflection. Stoicism is not a philosophy you finish. It is a philosophy you practice, daily, imperfectly, with the ongoing recognition that the gap between the ideal and the actual is not a sign that the philosophy has failed but a sign that the work continues. The Stoics knew this. Marcus Aurelius, writing his private meditations, was not recording his achievements. He was recording his struggles, the ongoing effort to apply, in the actual conditions of his actual life, the principles he believed in. He failed. He lost patience. He made compromises. He returned the next morning and tried again. This is the texture of Stoic practice. Not heroic transformation but the patient, daily choice to see more clearly, act more virtuously, and hold the present moment with the seriousness it deserves. It does not require dramatic circumstances. It does not require unusual intelligence or exceptional willpower. It requires only the willingness to take your own inner life seriously, to treat the cultivation of your character and the quality of your attention as the real work of your existence, prior to and more important than any external achievement. The three pillars are the structure of that work. Control what is yours. Build what is genuinely good. Remember what time actually is. These are not complicated instructions. They are not easy ones. But they are, in the deepest sense, enough. They are enough to transform the experience of a human life from one of chronic reaction to one of genuine, grounded, wakeful engagement with whatever comes. And that transformation is available to you, not someday, not when circumstances improve, not when you feel ready. Now, in the very next moment that asks something of you. Begin there. If this moved something in you, if something in these three pillars named a struggle you have been carrying or a clarity you have been searching for, then this channel was made for you. The examined life is worth living, and you do not have to live it alone. Subscribe and join a growing community of people committed to thinking deeply, living intentionally, and building something real from the inside out. New videos go up regularly, each one crafted to give you not just ideas, but the kind of perspective that stays with you and changes how you move through your days. Hit that subscribe button. The work begins here.